Ante todo, en primer
First of all, your time, I'd like to thank our ICER's friends to have organized this international gathering, international conference, because this is very useful for the organization and even for our mood. My contribution, I will be very blunt, so to say. It's kind of scientific entertainment, because I'm an anthropologist, I'm a person working in the botanic field, and all my articles have to do with psychology and anthropology. But for a while now, I started getting bored. And when the friend from ICER said, okay, why don't you present something? I said, I'm not going to present the same thing as usual, anthropology with the ayahuasca use and the impact in psychology. No. And there is a topic which is interesting to me. And I started doing some research, biophysics research, which are completely outside my field of research. But they can be significative. And I just give all the data that I'm presenting here as a kind of present to you all. I mean, if there is any scientist here wanting to use this data, please feel free, because it has been a kind of entertainment to me, and I won't be able to keep on using them probably in the future. For a while now, I realized there was an empirical reality in certain places. That's what we call hot places, hot spots, and this has nothing to do with sex. It's just places with a special energy that have been forever considered to be sacred places. And I'm not talking about temples. There's a kind of sensation of density that exists in some places. And in one of the traditions I've been trained with, it's stated that there are certain places that have this telluric strength. But in other places, this telluric strength needs to be activated. And there are a series of techniques, esoteric techniques sometimes, not so esoteric techniques that are there to activate certain places. And among different techniques and methods, these places can be activated or deactivated according to the purpose. So, taking into account this statement that some traditions have been saying and stating for centuries, and also using some data that were gathered by Raphael Balaguer about geometric entropies, I saw that indeed it was so. I mean, in places in which there was this electromagnetic density, high density, temples have been built in the past. And here we can see this image that show these dark spots, black spots. So we have these black spots that are related to the road of San Benito de Orante in Huesca in Spain. And these green spots, red, clear red, yellow, all these areas up to the sand are related to the electromagnetic measures of this area. And they are between 30,000 nanoteslas and 33,000 nanoteslas. And here we see once again another image which is related to this previous one. Precisely this one. So this image is a picture of Santa María de Onate in Navarra, and we see exactly the same, the church and the perimeter of the church, which is in this overlay with these different areas isotropic areas in which we see a major density, a bigger density. And it's exactly the same. This is measured in nanoteslas. There are different measures, but the one that we are using in this particular study are the nanoteslas in order to be to have this homogeneous study. But we have the same measures in this church, and then we have the megaliths near Bristol, Stonehenge, and we can see here the darker spots and the electromagnetic density in this area. So with these observation remarks, some years ago, and in particular in 2012, we saw with Dr. Alicia Guasch by the Department of Crystallography at the Physique. We made an experiment. She did it. In fact, she directed it. And we prepared special water for experiments. It's ultra purified without any kind of minerals being used in different labs in order to do research. And there were 3 bottles of this water. One of the bottles contained crystals. In fact, they all contain FFU protein in the water, which is FF1, which is a transcription factor linked to the DNA. And so we had these bottles with the protein in suspension in the middle of the room, a room in which there were 47 adults. And in an Ayahuasca session, and the format, by the way, was not a dance format or a singing format, but we were just silent for hours under the effect of 2 consecutive doses of ayahuasca in silence and in the dark. And after 4 hours or 4 hours and a half, roughly, the bottles were taken and the doctor took them to the lab 1 week after. And to her surprise, we saw these samples, and we see this picture, which is always taken twice. She made 96 experimental wells, and so that was in the room, and these others were the outskirts of the room, so to say, and another one 15 meters away from that room in which people were practicing ayahuasca. So the room that was next to the ayahuasca room. And the crystallization process of this protein was really surprising. This FF1 protein was surprising. So we see this picture related to the protein which was not crystallized, and these 2 ones have to do with the crystallization of the protein that was in the middle of the ayahuasca group. I was saying that the pictures are taken always twice, so these and these have to do with the same bottle. And the water that had been in the peripheral area, 15 meters away, had crystallized in a particular way. The rest of the protein in suspension just followed the standard crystallization protocol. To me, and I'm not a specialist in crystallography, I was really very surprised. And she saw that this protein that had been in the center and this one that had been in the center too, we could see really this amazing structure. And there are other samples that show more or less the same. So we can see here other drops of water, and we see the same. We had 96 samples. This one had been in the middle of the room, and these, which are the same, and these two, which are also the same. As I say, samples are always double, have to do with the crystallization of this protein in the water that was 15 meters away of the room in which the ayahuasca work had been done. And this third and last sample shows exactly the same. The water that had been in the middle, this and this, the protein had crystallized in a very particular manner, and these two pictures correspond to the water that was just 15 meters away from the room. So this experience, and I repeat, has not been followed up. It was just, one stunt. But of course, you know that usually in science we need to make many tests and hypotheses and tests and so on and so forth. But apart from that, as I was saying, this protein, FF1, which is a transcription factor linked to the NDA, is very important because for crystallographers, and I say it's not my specialty, and it's not because I don't like it, I have to say, but it's very important to have these nucleation linked to the NDA. And then we're going to see other images which have to do with another kind of experiment. As I was saying, the first pictures, they have shown that there was a nucleus with higher electromagnetism, and of course maybe the bottle maybe moved a little bit, but this was related to subjective experience. I mean, I've been in the Amazon taking ayahuasca many times, and I have always had the feeling that there was a field created, an electromagnetic field. So I have seen that there are different phenomena when ayahuasca is taken in group, and maybe that shows why ayahuasca needs to be taken in group. So there are things that have to do with behavior, and I decided to make an experience. Another technique that I use is the holorenic breath, and I direct a particular workshop with this kind of breathing, and the impression that I got is that a field, an electromagnetic field, was created. And I started to measure, and you see here the line in yellow, and I could see what I felt. This yellow line, which stays in 80, 90, and you know that 1 nanotesla is just a 1 millionth part of a Tesla, and a microtesla is 1,000 part of Tesla. So, but I did not put so many zeros. But we see the yellow line. We see the number of hours, or the time of the breathing, 11, 12, 1 p.m., etc. And we measured in the peripheral area of the room, and we took measures in the middle of the room, in the center, really, of the room, and in this peripheral area inside the room. So you do an arch around the center, and we see here how in the peripheral area of the room there was almost no change in the level of electromagnetism. However, in the center, this gray area that we see here in this graph, 2 hours after the start of the session, there was an increase, and we reached 5,700. We should put 6 zeros more after this zero that we see in the image. But the most important thing to me is that during this period, from 11 till 12 and a half, there's a catharsis period. So there is always, a very quick holorenic breathing. We look for that cathartic experience. So the idea is to let go every kind of pressure. And after this, there is an apnea session that may take a couple of hours. And sessions, let's say, starts at 11, so 1 hour and a half of this breathing, and then a couple of hours more up to here in apnea, where the participants just reach a kind of lassitude state. And here, when people just were leaving the room at 3 o'clock, this peak kept on rising. There are no more data, but after half an hour or 45 minutes, it started to decrease. I'm running out of time? Oh, 5 more minutes, that's great. Plenty of time then. So this is another session, the day after, November 4th, with this holorenic breathing. So the electromagnetic phenomenon is repeated, and the most interesting thing from my own point of view is that there is a peak here, an increase of the density, the level of electromagnetism, when it seems that the session is over. Well, let's see if the computer is working or not. Come on, because we're in a hurry. We're running out of time. So this took place in a ceremony on December 22 last year, and we see again the same electromagnetic phenomenon. So we see that we reach to 6,000, 6,000, etc. But the phenomenon is exactly the same. The session starts at 9, is moving forward. We see the yellow line that corresponds to the different takes and the data in the peripheral arch of the room. But density increases, as you can see. So there is a take of ayahuasca at 9 p.m., 10:30, a second take, and that's it. But the density, the electromagnetic density increases. And exactly the same happened in the next session. So all in all, what we can conclude, the conclusion that we can draw, is that this increase of the electromagnetic density to up to 5,000%, and it's exactly the same in ayahuasca session or holorenic breathing, builds a field that is built up by the whole of the participants. So this has nothing to do with DMT or whatever. It's a field created by the people, by the participants, and this field stays even when people have left the space in which the phenomenon took place, the experience took place. And to finish, this field that is being created among all has to do with the coherence of the heart rate. And I suspect, based upon this data, this phenomena, and the evolution of the electromagnetic spectrum, that ayahuasca and all other statogenic practices create an electromagnetic field that at the same time creates a cardiac coherence. And I can state that this cardiac coherence, this rhythm that has to do with endorphins and the neurological working of the brain and the body, and that the body as a whole gets into a feeling of coherence. This is something that has been studied, and there is a clear link between this cardiac coherence that I'm not gonna explain because that could take me 15 more minutes, but there is a link between cardiac coherence and welfare, well-being, general well-being of the body. And I think that I'm gonna leave it there, but you have this data for you, it's the present. I'm an anthropologist, but I think it's interesting. And this graphic, by the way, is very interesting to me because from the first moment the electromagnetic field increased on the room while there was no one in the middle of the room, in the center. This was done with the same group, 49 people, but instead of them being in the room, this area is in a park, and sometimes in this park there are ayahuasca sessions. So people, if have experience, of course, they are free to just stroll on the park or whatever, or be next to a tree or whatever they want. But it's very interesting to me that the field has stayed in the room because the measures were taken into the room, and this was so despite the fact that the members of the group were outside the room. And when the session had ended, the electromagnetic field just decreased and everything stopped here, you see, at about 2:30. And so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.